The sheriff's representative stood at the threshold, documents tucked discreetly within his coat, his exhalations misting in the frigid November atmosphere. Mara registered his pronouncements: eviction, repossession, the rapid erosion of deadlines from 30 days to a fortnight, and then to immediate action. Yet they seemed to emanate from an immense distance. Behind her, Clara remained immobile, as sculpted stone, her small hand clasped firmly in Joey's. The representative's gaze conveyed no malice, only a profound weariness. "Ma'am, I am truly sorry about this," he conveyed, and Mara found herself believing him. "How much time do we have left?" Her voice, though outwardly composed, belied the tremor in her hands. "Until the sun sets. I will wait outside." They began to gather what they could manage. Clara meticulously rolled the thick blankets. Joey carefully collected his wooden steed and 3 smooth pebbles from the creek bed, placing them within a tobacco tin. Mara secured the heavy cast-iron skillet, a Dutch oven swaddled in fabric, an axe and a hatchet, a length of rope, her sewing ensemble, a hammer, nails wrapped in oilcloth, the lantern with its remaining fuel, a box of matches, dried beans, cornmeal, and Thomas's pocket knife, its handle worn smooth from years of use. From the mantelpiece she retrieved one final item, a letter Thomas had dispatched from Virginia in the spring of '64. The paper, softened by time, bore ink that had begun to fade. She folded it with care and placed it against her heart, nestled within her bodice. The wagon had long been relinquished, the mule gone. Their journey would be on foot. The path ascended westward, leading toward the rugged terrain of the ridge country, its surface deeply rutted and partially frozen. Mara had confided their destination to no one, harboring no desire for undue attention or interrogation. Clara hoisted a bundle securely onto her shoulders. Joey struggled with a burlap sack, his face flushed with exertion. Mara, burdened by the Dutch oven, tools, and provisions, felt her spine curve under the substantial load. The November sky loomed, a heavy, somber gray. They traversed the landscape for hours. As afternoon approached, they veered off the road, following the course of Willowglass Creek upstream. Mara was intimately familiar with this region. She and Thomas had explored its contours in their early years, long before children, before the war. High above, Raven's Shelf presented itself like successive tiers of weathered, gray-brown rock. Beneath its protective overhang, a cave offered a familiar refuge, a place where they had once sought shelter during a summer tempest. "Are we much farther?" Joey inquired, his voice thin and weary. "Not much further," Mara reassured him. "You are doing exceptionally well." As the imposing bluff came into view, Clara's gaze immediately fell upon the deep shadow cast by the shelf. "There, just there," Mara directed. The cavern's entrance yawned wide, akin to the gaping maw of a barn, yet the extensive overhang above kept its interior perfectly dry. Not a single snowflake or raindrop had penetrated its depths. Mara pushed through the dense juniper growth and stepped into the cool embrace of the shadow. The temperature dropped perceptibly, the stone retaining a significant chill, but the atmosphere within was both still and arid. With hands that trembled slightly, she ignited the lantern, its warm glow pushing back the encroaching darkness. The cavern extended deep, perhaps 40 feet from its opening to the rear wall, its ceiling soaring to a height that would challenge a man holding an axe overhead, sloping gently towards the back. The walls, fashioned from smooth, cool stone, bore the subtle shaping of water over eons. Ancient leaves and scattered twigs carpeted the floor, carried in by the persistent wind and the passage of time. A darkened circle of stones near the center served as a testament to past encampments, where fires had once burned brightly, tended by trappers, travelers, or perhaps indigenous peoples long before the arrival of settlers. Mara gently set down her burden. Her shoulders ached, bearing the distinct imprint of the rope that had chafed her skin. Her back felt irrevocably twisted from the prolonged journey, stooped beneath the weight. She straightened with deliberate slowness, her spine emitting a series of creaks. "We will rest here for the night," she announced, her voice taking on a peculiar resonance within the cave's natural acoustics, echoing softly. "Tomorrow, we commence construction." Clara knelt, her fingers stiff with cold, and began to unpack the quilts, spreading them upon the driest section of the cave floor. Joey stood at the cave's mouth, gazing outward at the creek winding through the darkening woodland beyond, his small silhouette stark against the muted grey of the twilight. Mara observed her children, a profound sense of the gravity of their situation settling upon her. A mere cavity in the earth, devoid of a proper floor, lacking any means of warmth, and with no door to secure against the encroaching night, the harshness of winter already palpable, and only her own two hands to shield them from the biting cold. Yet it offered dryness and vital shelter, and she possessed a history of building, fences, fowl houses, a root cellar. She had assisted Thomas in erecting the cabin walls, diligently mixing the mud for chinking and carefully notching the logs. She had shouldered the responsibilities of two since his departure, and now, once more, she would rise to the challenge. That inaugural night, they huddled together beneath all three quilts, Clara positioned in the center, Joey nestled against his sister. Mara kindled a modest fire within the ancient stone enclosure, utilizing her precious matches and the driest twigs she could procure. The smoke ascended directly upwards, finding a fissure in the ceiling and vanishing into the unseen darkness above, a promising indicator that the cave possessed adequate ventilation. She tended the fire with extreme care, maintaining its modest size to conserve their dwindling wood supply. Outside, an owl hooted its lonely call. The creek whispered its eternal melody. Within the cave's sanctuary, her children slept soundly, while Mara remained vigilant, feeding the flames, stick by stick, her thoughts preoccupied with the immense tasks that lay ahead. The initial days were dedicated to remediation. They swept the floor using juniper branches, meticulously removed accumulated debris, and cleared away stones to level the ground near the entrance. Mara designated a section along the north wall for the hearth, anticipating that it would draw air from the cave's opening and channel smoke through a gap she intended to enlarge in the stone ceiling. She marked this area with a ring of rocks. Clara ventured to explore the creek. The water flowed shallowly, barely reaching her knees, its current swift as it tumbled over a bed of smoothly rounded stones. She observed trout lurking in the shaded depths beneath a large boulder, their bodies shimmering with a golden-silver hue. However, her attempts to catch them with her bare hands proved futile as they vanished instantly. She returned with sleeves damp and fingers chilled. "We will require a deeper section," Mara stated, "a place where the fish will remain stationary long enough for us to capture them." "A dam," Clara proposed. "A small one?" Mara assented. "But first, we must seal the cave." The construction of the front wall demanded nearly a week of strenuous effort. They possessed no lumber, no sawmill within a 20-mile radius, and crucially, no funds to acquire boards, even if transportation were feasible. Fortunately, the surrounding woods yielded ample deadfall. Pine and oak trunks, felled by past storms, now weathered to a silver-gray hue, yet sound at their core, lay partially obscured by fallen leaves and moss. Mara employed the axe to trim away branches, her shoulders burning with each powerful swing, the sharp blade biting deep into the seasoned wood. Clara and Joey assisted by dragging the smaller pieces, working in unison, their breaths appearing as white blooms in the frigid morning air. For the larger logs, Mara utilized wedges. She inserted a wedge into a natural fissure and hammered it deeply, then drove a second wedge alongside the first. The log cleaved apart with a sharp crack that reverberated off the bluff. She then worked to split these sections further, transforming them into rough planks, each one representing an hour of arduous labor. The hammer, a borrowed implement from Ephraim Cole, the blacksmith in Pinehook Crossing, obtained in exchange for mending his Sunday attire, was crafted from excellent iron and possessed a perfect balance. She intended to return it upon completion of the work and perhaps negotiate for additional hinges, nails, and a length of strap iron. She firmly embedded two substantial posts on either side of the cave's mouth, selecting the straightest deadfall log she could locate, each one as thick as her thigh. She excavated post holes using the hatchet, chipping away at the rocky ground, and then drove the posts deeply into the earth, securing them with packed stones for stability. Ensuring the posts were perfectly plumb was paramount. She tested their verticality with a suspended stone attached to a string, making minute adjustments until the weight hung true. Between these posts, she stacked logs and planks horizontally, carefully notching each piece where it met the posts, fitting them snugly together. Initially, significant gaps remained, allowing daylight to penetrate and the wind to gust through. However, the framework had to be established first, followed by the ceiling. She proceeded from bottom to top, each course of logs heavy, each piece requiring all her strength to lift and position accurately. Her hands blistered, the blisters subsequently ruptured and bled before finally callousing over. Clara provided support, steadying the pieces while Mara meticulously notched and fitted them. Joey diligently carried tools and held nails in his small, precise hands. The wall gradually ascended, reaching knee height on the first day and waist height by the third. The work was agonizingly slow and punishing, her muscles protesting vehemently by evening. Yet each morning, the wall remained steadfast, solid, awaiting her continued efforts. Joey diligently gathered moss from the creek bank, where it grew in thick patches upon the stones, and dried grass from the meadow below the bluff, collecting armfuls of it, pulling it from where it clung in sparse tufts. Though his hands were small, he worked with unwavering dedication, filling a grain sack with the material for chinking. "This is excellent moss, Mama," he declared, holding up a fistful, his expression earnest. "It's soft. It will pack well. It is perfect," Mara affirmed, and his face illuminated with pride. Once the wall stood at chest height, robust and true, Mara turned her attention to constructing the door. This task demanded utmost precision. She had salvaged 3 wide planks and a pair of strap hinges from Ephraim Cole, trading a week's worth of mending work and a promise to provide him with fish once the creek was dammed, fish he could smoke and preserve through the winter. A fair exchange for essential hardware. She laid the planks side by side on level ground, meticulously checking their alignment. Wood, being prone to warping in various directions, necessitated careful selection. She chose the sides with the straightest grain to face outward. She measured and marked the locations for the cross braces, 2 in number, which would secure the planks together. The markings had to be exact. Employing Thomas's pocket knife, she scored the wood, then carefully drove nails, pre-drilling pilot holes to prevent splitting. 3 nails were used per joint. Her hands, stiff with cold, made the work painstaking. The hinges were affixed to the left side. She positioned them with extreme care, marking the screw holes, then creating pilot holes with a borrowed auger, a tool she would have to return. The screws turned with considerable resistance, the wood reluctant to yield. She fashioned a wooden latch and a bar for the interior, fitting them with a patience born of absolute necessity. Every component had to function perfectly, had to endure. Initially, the door hung askew, dragging on the ground. Mara assessed the problem, then planed the bottom edge with a draw knife, shaving off thin curls of wood until the bottom surface was smooth and even. She rehung the door, carefully checking its swing. This time, it moved freely, the hinges creaking but holding firm. She stepped back, hands resting on her hips, her lower back throbbing, and allowed herself a faint, fleeting smile. Clara stood beside her, gazing at the door. A genuine door, hung straight, effectively barring the wind. "It's a real door," Clara exclaimed, her voice imbued with wonder. "Indeed it is," Mara concurred. They completed the wall by meticulously packing the gaps with chinking. Mara mixed mud sourced from the creek bank, a rich clay-laden mixture that would harden with Joey's moss and dried grass. She kneaded it thoroughly, much like bread dough, until the desired consistency was achieved. With her bare hands, she pressed the mixture into every crack and crevice, working it deep within, smoothing it with her palms. The mud would freeze during the night and soften by midday when the sun illuminated the cave's entrance. Consequently, Mara learned to work only during the warmest hours, sealing sections one at a time. Her hands were raw, her knuckles split and bleeding from the relentless labor in the biting cold. She wrapped them in cloth each night, binding them tightly, and persevered through the discomfort. This was survival. This was the price they had to pay. The construction of the chimney proved more challenging than the wall. Mara had previously erected stone walls, including garden borders and a low enclosure for the chicken coop back at the cabin, but never one that was required to draw smoke effectively, to channel heat and noxious fumes away from her sleeping children. This was an exercise in engineering, not merely stacking stones. She began by carefully observing the cave's natural airflow. She lit a small fire in the original stone circle and intently watched the smoke. It rose vertically, wavering slightly, seeking an exit, and ultimately found a natural fissure in the ceiling where water had eroded the rock over centuries. The smoke was drawn into this crack, propelled by the temperature differential between the cave's interior and the external atmosphere. This was precisely where her chimney needed to be situated. She commenced construction along the north wall, stacking flat stones procured from the creek bed, meticulously selecting each one for its weight and inherent balance. The stones had to rest securely, without any wobbling, each course staggered from the one below, akin to bricks in a conventional wall. She employed mud as mortar, a thick clay mixture from the creek bank, combined with a small amount of sand for added strength, understanding that it would bake hard once the fire reached a sufficient intensity. The work was slow and meditative, each stone being tested 3 times before she committed it to the structure. Clara assisted by carrying smaller stones from the creek bed, learning to identify the flattest ones, those possessing right angles and smooth surfaces. They worked together in near silence for the most part, the gentle clinking of stone against stone being the only sound besides the ceaseless murmur of the creek. "How high does it need to be, Mama?" Clara inquired when the chimney had reached shoulder height. "High enough to reach that crack?" Mara replied, pointing upwards. "And then we will enlarge it so the smoke can escape freely. If we construct it correctly, the warm air will rise and draw the smoke upward behind it. If we err in its construction, we will suffer the consequences of suffocating fumes." The ceiling was composed of softer stone, layered and somewhat crumbly, possibly sandstone or weathered limestone. Mara utilized the hatchet and a sharpened stake as a chisel, working with utmost caution to widen the natural fissure, taking care to avoid any significant collapse. Dust and stone chips rained down, lodging in her hair, her eyes, and her mouth. She worked with her head tilted backward, her arms aching from the sustained effort of reaching overhead. By the 4th day, she had successfully created a gap approximately the width of both her fists, a throat sufficiently broad to allow smoke passage, yet narrow enough to maintain a strong draft. She then constructed the chimney upwards to meet this opening, gradually narrowing the throat with deliberate precision to ensure the draft would pull powerfully. She incorporated a small aperture near the base, designed as an ash cleanout, allowing her to reach in and remove accumulated debris. The uppermost courses presented the greatest difficulty, requiring her to work directly overhead, with mud dripping onto her face. Upon completion, the chimney stood 7 feet tall, solid and true, its throat perfectly aligned with the ceiling gap. The ultimate test arrived when she ignited the first substantial fire. She built it with meticulous care, starting with tinder, followed by kindling, and then larger sticks, holding her breath as the flames took hold. Smoke billowed upwards. For a fleeting moment, it seemed to function as intended. Then it surged back, filling the cave, stinging their eyes and throats. Clara coughed violently. Joey buried his face in a quilt, his small body trembling. Mara's heart sank like a heavy stone, but she forced herself to engage her intellect. She opened the door wide and through streaming eyes scrutinized the chimney. The throat, she realized, was too wide. The warm air was escaping, but it was not effectively drawing the smoke with it. She required more resistance, a greater velocity within the column. She waited for the fire to subside, then meticulously rebuilt the upper portion of the chimney, adding stones to further narrow the throat, angling them inward to create a more rapid draft. She adjusted the angle where it met the ceiling gap. The endeavor consumed hours, her hands stained black with soot, her lungs raw from inhaling smoke. She relit the fire, a smaller, more controlled flame this time. She watched the smoke intently. It ascended, wavered at the throat. Come on, come on. Then it caught the draft and climbed. The smoke column thinned, drew upward, and vanished into the ceiling gap. Within minutes, the cave was clear. Mara closed the door almost completely, leaving only a narrow crack to allow for air intake. The fire burned steadily, and a comforting warmth spread through the space like a benediction. Joey crept closer, holding his hands towards the heat, his face smudged with soot. "It works, Mama," he whispered, his voice filled with profound awe. "It works," Mara responded, feeling tears prick her eyes. Not from smoke this time, but from pure relief. They transformed the cave into a dwelling. Mara constructed a sleeping platform from split logs, elevated above the cold floor, and filled it with dry grass and pine boughs, upon which they placed the quilts. She drove pegs into the wall for hanging damp clothing. Clara meticulously arranged their few possessions on a natural rock shelf: tin cups, spoons, the sack of cornmeal. Joey kept the kindling neatly bundled near the hearth, sorted by size: finger thin, thumb thick, wrist thick. He learned to build a fire precisely as his father had taught Mara. A tinder nest, followed by fine kindling, and then a gentle breath. At night, the lamp burned low, and the firelight cast dancing shadows upon the stone walls. It was warm. It was dry. Mara sat on the sleeping platform, mending a tear in Clara's skirt, and experienced a sensation she hadn't felt in months: the quiet satisfaction of work successfully accomplished. However, sustenance remained a pressing concern. The creek presented itself as a potential source, but its flow was too swift and shallow. Mara walked its entire length, carefully studying the stones and the current. 50 yards downstream from the cave, the creek curved around a large boulder. There, the stream bed widened and the current slackened. She observed trout congregating in the slower water, their shadows dark against the gravelly bottom. "We will dam it here," she declared. Clara assisted her in gathering stones, selecting smooth creek rocks the size of loaves and larger ones that they rolled together with considerable effort. They stacked them in a low curve across the creek, leaving a narrow gap in the center for overflow. Mara wedged flat stones into the remaining gaps, gradually raising the dam's height. Joey carried smaller stones to fill the minute cracks, his feet splashing in the frigid water. "Careful, Joey," Mara cautioned. "Step slowly." The dam rose a foot, then two. The water began to pool behind it, deepening the basin and reducing the flow's velocity. Mara reinforced the central section with planks and heavy stones. The overflow spilled through with a soft, rushing sound, reminiscent of a miniature waterfall. By evening, the pool above the dam had reached waist depth, its surface calm and clear. Trout circled lazily in the stillness, their fins gently undulating. Clara stood at the edge, watching. "They are right there," she stated, her voice filled with wonder. "Tomorrow we shall fish," Mara promised. Mara fashioned a fishing pole from a straight willow branch and attached a length of line to its tip. The hook was a simple J-shaped piece of wire bartered from Ephraim coal. Clara dug for worms in the soft mud near the creek's edge and baited the hook. She settled onto a flat stone beside the dam pool, tucking her feet beneath her skirt, and lowered the line into the water. "Don't move," Mara whispered. Clara remained perfectly still. She watched the line intently, her body as unmoving as the stone she sat upon. The hook sank, the worm writhing. A trout approached. Its curiosity piqued. It nipped at the bait. Clara waited. It nipped again, then struck with conviction. Clara lifted the pole too quickly, and the fish escaped. "Patience," Mara advised. "Allow it to fully take the hook." Clara tried again. This time, when the fish struck, she counted to 3 before lifting the pole. The rod bent, the line sang with tension. A trout broke the surface, thrashing vigorously, and Clara guided it carefully towards the bank. Mara deftly scooped it up with her hands and swiftly struck it against a stone, rendering it still. Clara stared at the fish held in her mother's hands, its scales gleaming brilliantly, and her face broke into a radiant smile. "I did it," she proclaimed. "Indeed you did," Mara replied. Over the subsequent days, Clara successfully caught 4 more trout. She developed an innate understanding of the water, learning where the fish congregated, what bait they favored, and at what times of day they actively fed. She cleaned them herself, making a precise incision along the belly and discarding the entrails into the creek. Mara demonstrated the technique for smoking them on a low rack over the fire, transforming the flesh to a golden hue and firm texture, and explained how to salt them if salt was available, or to dry them in the cold air if it was not. Joey's contributions, though quieter, were no less crucial. Each morning, he meticulously checked the kindling bundles and gathered more from the woods, selecting only the driest twigs that snapped cleanly, sorting them by thickness. He learned to identify punky, crumbly wood, which was useless, and to choose hardwoods over pine. He maintained the fire-making tools, the flint, the charcloth, the striker, and the poker in their designated spot. On one occasion, when the fire had dwindled low and Mara was at the creek, Joey, with remarkable self-reliance, rebuilt it himself, his small hands working with careful precision, his face a mask of concentration. "Good work, son," Mara commended upon her return. Joey beamed with pride. One particularly cold afternoon, an older woman appeared at the cave's entrance. She was clad in a patched wool coat and a faded bonnet, and she carried a bundle wrapped in cloth. Mara emerged from the cave, her demeanor cautious. "Mrs. Whitlow," the woman introduced herself. "I am Ida Alder. I heard in town that you had settled out here." Mara remained silent. Mrs. Alder gently placed the bundle on the ground. "It's a quilt," she explained. "And a tin of lard. My husband passed on 3 winters ago, and I understand what it is to face the cold alone." She gazed at Mara with clear, compassionate eyes, offering neither charity nor pity, simply the gesture of a neighbor. Mara's throat tightened with emotion. "I will repay you." "There is no need," Mrs. Alder replied. "But if you catch an abundance of fish come spring, I would not refuse." Mara nodded in agreement. Mrs. Alder departed, and Mara unfolded the quilt. It was thick, expertly stitched, and still retained the residual warmth from the older woman's home. That night, the children slept beneath it, and Mara felt a slight easing of the knot of anxiety in her chest. December arrived with a harsh intensity. The air turned sharp, biting exposed skin like 1,000 tiny needles. The edges of the creek began to freeze each night. Morning brought increasingly thicker layers of ice. Mara studied the sky and the wind, recalling the omens Thomas had imparted. She remembered the hush of chickadees, the hues of twilight, and the peculiar pressure in her ears. One dawn, she awoke to in profound quiet. No birds chirped, no wind stirred, utter stillness. The sky was a heavy, oppressive gray, the color of tarnished metal. The air held a metallic tang. A storm was approaching, Mara declared, a formidable one. She and Clara began working with urgency, reinforcing the dam with additional stones piled against its upstream side, wedging them securely. Mara meticulously inspected every inch of the front wall, pressing chinking material into any newly formed fissures caused by the freezing temperatures. She then ascended the rock ledge to check the chimney, clearing its flue to ensure an unimpeded draft. Joey diligently collected every fragment of dry kindling he could find, gathering armfuls and stacking them inside, away from the door where snow might be driven in. They brought in extra water, filling the Dutch oven and the spider to their very rims. Mara prepared a large cauldron of bean stew, enough for 2 days, and placed it near the hearth to keep it warm without scorching. They sealed the door tightly, stuffing rags along its base to block the wind. Inside, the fire burned with a steady warmth, and a lamp cast a gentle glow from its shelf. They waited. The blizzard descended at twilight with a sound akin to a train hurtling through the trees, a growing roar. The wind slammed against the bluff like a physical blow, shrieking around the rock and whistling through every crevice. Snow fell in a relentless torrent, huge flakes at first, then smaller, and finally so densely that the world outside the cave's opening vanished. Within an hour, snowdrifts piled against the door, pressing against the wood, seeking ingress. The wind found every minute gap in the chinking and sang a high, thin, cold melody. Inside, they huddled near the fire. Clara sat enveloped in 2 quilts, her arms around Joey. Mara tended the fire, keeping vigil. The storm raged through the night, unyielding. Snow accumulated, and the wind never ceased. Midway through the second night, Mara awoke to the smell of smoke. It wasn't the clean aroma of a well-burning fire, but a thick, acrid smoke backing into the cave. She could taste it, feeling it claw at her throat. Clara coughed, a deep, rasping sound. Joey whimpered in his sleep, his breathing shallow. The fire sputtered, choked, and burned improperly. Mara scrambled out of bed, her hands trembling as she pulled on her coat. Gripping the poker and hatchet, her heart pounded in her chest. "Stay inside," she instructed Clara. "Keep Joey warm." She pushed against the door, requiring considerable effort and her full weight, and it yielded only slightly. Snow had drifted against it, 3 feet deep, compacted by the wind. She pushed again, with more force, a desperate surge, managing to open it a mere crack. The wind shrieked through the gap, lashing snow into her face and blinding her. The cold was immediate, shocking, and agonizing. She squeezed through the narrow opening and stumbled into the blinding white chaos of the storm. Visibility was 0. The blizzard was absolute. A solid wall of white, the wind tearing at her clothes, snow driving horizontally. She felt for the cave wall with her hands, using it as a guide. The rock shelf was somewhere above. She had to climb. Her hands were already numb, her face burning with cold. She found handholds by touch and pulled herself onto the shelf, crawling on hands and knees. The wind attempted to dislodge her. She flattened herself against the rock and continued to move. Her hands located the chimney's opening. It was blocked. Snow and ice had frozen into a solid plug. The smoke had no escape. She hammered at the obstruction with the hatchet, her frozen fingers barely able to grip the handle. She chipped away ice, cleared the packed snow, working blind in the whiteout. Her lungs burned. Her fingers, screaming with cold, went numb, a perilous sign. She persisted. She had to. If the smoke continued to back up, the children would suffocate. This thought fueled a strength she didn't know she possessed. When the blockage finally broke free, smoke billowed out, a dark plume against the white storm, rising and dissipating. Mara felt an almost physical release. She had succeeded. They could breathe. Descending was more challenging. Her hands no longer responded properly. They lacked grip. She half climbed, half fell, landing heavily at the cave's base. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, forcing herself upright, she pushed through the door, snow billowing in with her. Clara helped her shut it. Inside, the smoke was already clearing, drawn up the now unobstructed chimney. The fire blazed brighter, burning correctly and cleanly. Mara sank to her knees, trembling uncontrollably. Her coat was crusted with ice. Her hands were white, bloodless, and numb. Clara removed Mara's frozen, wet gloves and wrapped her mother's hands in dry cloth, holding them against her own body for warmth. Joey pulled the quilt tighter around them. They moved Mara closer to the fire. Sensation returned to her fingers in waves of intense pain. She bit her lip to suppress a cry, not wanting to alarm the children further. It took an hour before she could properly flex her fingers, and the white patches on her fingertips regained their natural pink color. "Mama, are you all right?" Joey whispered, his eyes wide in the firelight. "I'm all right," she managed. "It's all right now." But her hands shook for hours afterward, and sleep eluded her. The storm persisted for 2 days. They took turns sleeping, tending the fire, and listening to the wind. The door held, the walls remained secure, and the chimney drew clearly. On the second morning, Joey noticed something. "Mama, the dam," he said, peering through a crack. Mara looked. The creek had frozen along its edges, and ice was accumulating against the dam's face, pressing and groaning. If it broke, the pool would empty and the fish would scatter. Mara pulled on her coat and boots. "Clara, come with me. Joey, stay inside." They ventured into the freezing creek, breaking ice with flat stones and clearing the overflow channel. Mara's hands grew numb, then the pain subsided. Clara's teeth chattered, but she worked without complaint. Together, they shifted stones to redirect the pressure, easing the ice jam. When the ice broke free and flowed downstream, the dam held firm. They stumbled back inside, soaked and shivering. Mara removed Joey's wet clothes and hung them by the fire. Clara wrapped herself in the quilt Mrs. Alder had given them. Mara's fingers throbbed as they thawed. "We did it," Clara said. "We did," Mara replied. By the third morning, the storm had abated. The sky cleared to a pale, fragile blue. Snow blanketed the world, smooth and silent. Mara opened the door and stepped outside. The air bit at her lungs. The creek flowed beneath a skin of ice, and the dam stood solid, the pool behind it dark and still. Clara joined her, followed by Joey, wrapped in his coat. They stood together, the three of them, gazing out at the white wilderness. Smoke rose straight from their chimney, a thin gray line against the sky. "People in town are calling this place Widow's Hollow," Clara said quietly. "I heard Mrs. Alder say it." Mara stiffened. Widow's Hollow. A name signifying pity, sorrow, and defeat. But then she looked at the cave, at its sturdy wall, the straight hanging door, the chimney that drew true. She thought of the dam they had built, the fish they had caught, the fire that had remained lit. She thought of her children, still here, still warm, still alive. "Let them call it that," Mara said. "We know what it really is." "What's that, Mama?" Joey asked. Mara placed her hand on his head, then on Clara's shoulder. "Home," she said. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and the temperature plummeted, they sat inside by the fire. Clara had caught 2 trout that afternoon, their first since the storm, and Mara cooked them in the spider with a touch of Mrs. Alder's lard. The aroma filled the cave, rich, savory, and life-affirming. Joey tended the fire, adding kindling with precision, his face earnest in his task. Clara sat cross-legged on the sleeping platform, mending her fishing line. Mara stirred the fish and watched her children, feeling the tight bands around her heart loosen. Outside, the stars appeared, cold and brilliant. The creek sang its quiet song. Somewhere on the ridge, an owl hooted. Inside the cave, inside Widow's Hollow, the lamp glowed steadily on the stone shelf. The fire burned warm, and the three of them were together. They had lost everything, and in doing so, they had forged something new, something that could not be taken, something that was undeniably theirs. Mara looked at the door, straight and solid, and at the chimney that climbed the wall like a fulfilled promise. She looked at her children, safe and fed and learning resilience. She smiled. They would be all right. They already were.